Okay, everyone, and John Fletcher here, ASDN School Mental Health Mentor, and I'm just going to walk you through a presentation we did on September 2nd, as you can see on the screen here, talking about social emotional learning. And it really is just SEL 101, getting everybody on the same page. This is great for administrators, classroom teachers, and in ASDN, we offered this for our leads and our subject coordinators. So, like I said, getting everybody on the same page so we know what SEL is, where it's already being done really well, and some other areas we can highlight and embed a bit more. So, what I'd like to do, obviously not going to raise hands. This is a pre-recorded PL, but what I want you to think about is think about the following statements and if you agree or disagree with them. When you're thinking of the statement, think of your own children. If you're a parent, so myself, I have a couple kids that are in school age this year. Think about them, and or think about the children that you teach, so that your actual classroom students. So the first statement is having a high level of self-awareness, which consists of emotional intelligence, recognizing one's strengths and weaknesses, and being confident, are essential skills of a 21st century learner. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? Having a high level of social awareness, which consists of being empathic, taking perspectives, appreciating diversity, and having respect for others, are essential skills of a 21st century learner. Do you agree or disagree? Third one, being able to make decisions in a responsible manner, which consists of identifying problems, analyzing situations, solving problems, evaluating, reflecting, acting ethically and morally, are essential skills of a 21st century learner. Having a high level of self-management, which consists of...
Excuse me, Mr. Loban, report to your classroom and log into your computer.
Sorry for that. I'm in a school and I just had the announcements on. So we'll go back. Number 4, having a high level of self-management, which consists of controlling impulses, managing toxic stress, having self-discipline, being motivated and organized, and having a growth mindset are essential skills of a 21st century learner. And finally, the last one, being able to establish and maintain healthy relationships, which consists of having strong communication skills, knowing how to properly engage and interact in social situations, and work well within a team environment, are essential skills of a 21st century learner. So, hopefully, you agree with these 5 statements. And basically, what we're doing here is I just wanted to set the tone because I think we can all agree that all of these 5 statements that I just read are they make up some really essential skills that our students need to master or be on the pathway or the roadway to mastering by the time they finish public school within ASDN or other jurisdictions within the province. So what this is these are kind of what I call that this is the finish line, or these are the goals we want to get to by the time our students are grade 12. This presentation is going to back it up a little bit and look at where are we currently and what are some steps we need to make so that all of our students are being prepared with these essential skills and like I said, mastering them or on the pathway to mastering them by the time they graduate high school. So the agenda for today, that was just kind of the tone setter. The agenda, we're just going to look at the EECD and the district focus from ASDN. We're going to look at CASEL's 5 core competencies, which we just went over in that previous slide, but we'll flesh them out a little bit more. We'll look at some myths and misinformation about social emotional learning, review the September soft launch resource that ASDN just put out earlier this week. We'll look at the CASEL website, and we'll look at some of your reflection. You won't be able to do the activity we did in person, but your reflection will be where does social and emotional learning fit into your respective subject area? If you're literacy, if you're numeracy, if you're science, cross-curricular, kindergarten, middle school, high school, wherever your age range or your subject area is, where does that fit in? And then what it looks like to become a leader in social and emotional learning. So if you're not aware, because of COVID-19, we realized students have been out of school for 6 months. Early on in the pandemic here in New Brunswick, it was, I think, a big strain. We can all agree on everyone and relationships. Even though we were virtually connected with our loved ones and our friends and our family members, being isolated and quarantined and being shut down from March through April, it did play its toll on our social and emotional health. And I think the politicians, I think the health leaders in the province realize, and even in Canada and worldwide, realize that we have to make sure we look at the other health determinants as well. So the focus this year from EECD, from a departmental provincial level, the three big pillars are literacy, numeracy, social emotional learning. ASDN, which is where I work out of, our focus here is two big pillars, which is digital literacy, so our technological piece, because we know that especially in the upper grades in high school, that's really going to be important. And then the other one is social emotional learning, which we know that that is equally as important. So as our superintendent has referred multiple times in the last couple of weeks, the new 3 R's for back to school are relationships, relationships, relationships. And that comes from George Couros, an educational, motivational speaker and leader within Canada. So some myths about social emotional learning. One that I hear a lot, and I still do, and I think we need to kind of bust these myths because we're going to find out here social emotional learning actually is academic, social, and emotional learning. So SEL encompasses 3 different domains. It's not just about emotions. Some people will say to me, oh, that social emotional stuff, sitting around a room and just talking about emotions all class, that's not really my thing. That's not really what SEL is. So it's much more than that. Obviously, part of it is, but it's not the all-encompassing part of social emotional learning. SEL skills are not as important as hard skills. So I'm a parent of 4 kids. 2 of them are school-aged. And I know for myself, I absolutely want my kids to be proficient in numeracy and literacy and science and humanities, have that reading, writing, and arithmetic. But I also want my kids to be able to be self-aware, to manage their emotions, to be able to make strong decisions, have strong relationship skills, and so on. So saying that social and emotional skills, the soft skills, are not as important as the hard skills, there's really all the evidence in the research is saying that you need those soft skills, a good foundation in the social and emotional skills before you can actually get to the more hard skills like numeracy and literacy and so on. So that's a myth out there as well. SEL skills, number 3, are inherent and do not need to be taught. So I'm going to talk about this on a slide in a couple minutes. And there's a myth out there that we don't need to teach SEL. That's just inherent. Kids should have this from home. Maybe they should, but we know that there's a lot of gaps. So if you're not getting the skills at home, you need to be getting them at school. That's the second place where you need to be. If there's a gap from home, the gaps need to be filled in the educational environment. Number 4, SEL only fits into health and wellness courses. As we're going to find out, SEL already fits into every course and every discipline before COVID. And I think we need to spend some time just highlighting where SEL is already happening, because I think a lot of teachers may not even realize how much SEL is already happening within their classrooms, within their curriculums. Yes, you can specialize a little bit more in health and wellness courses, but SEL fits into all domains or all disciplinary areas. Finally, that should say number 5, SEL is only for students with behavior issues. No, not at all. SEL is something that if it's good for the best, it's good for the rest. This is not just for students who are struggling behaviorally. Maybe they need a little bit more time and effort with some of these skills, but we need to make sure all of our students are very competent socially and emotionally before they graduate high school. So it's not just for the students with behavior issues. So why do we have to teach and model social emotional skills? I thought I updated this slide and broken into 2, but I'm seeing that I didn't. So bear with me. It's a lot of text on one slide. I'm breaking a couple rules here. So there's a couple things that, and there's more than just a slide. There's a lot of variables. We can't just point our finger at one thing. Why that is the reason why we now have to teach and model social and emotional skills. But I'm going to highlight some things that there is some research behind. research behind these, and following Michael Ungar, the resilience guru, Stan Kuchar, all the leaders in the field of mental health and resilience and developmental ecologies and so on. So one phenomenon is our families are much smaller. So I just looked up on Stats Canada the other day, and in the last 50 years, family size has decreased by 33%, by about a third. And then there's a significant decrease in families over 5. So families that are bigger than 5, that means mom, dad, and 3 children, there's even less families that are bigger than that cohort. So how does this relate to social emotional learning? When you had bigger families, the older kids learned a lot of social emotional skills when they had to look out for their younger brothers and sisters. And I'm seeing this happen in my household right now with, we call the 2 bigs and the 2 littles, a 6 and 8-year-old and a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. And the skills, when you have older kids looking out for littler ones, they're learning all kinds of things about self-management and self-awareness and empathy and all those great skills that are happening organically. That would probably happen, that are still happening in families, but because families are smaller, sometimes there's less opportunity. The other piece is for the younger kids, my 2 littles, they're getting extra SEL skills because they have 2 little quasi-adults that are helping them out and that they look up to, and their mirror neurons, the phenomenon of mirror neurons is happening, so they're modeling the older kids and how they act and so on. So there's a lot of things going on when you have more people within the building. And that directly relates to that third bullet point, physical proximity. I think it was Jody Carrington talks about in her book, our houses are bigger, but our families are smaller. So there's actually more space between humans now than there was a couple generations ago. I know the house that I'm living in right now, my neighbors grew up in that house, and there were, I think, 6 or 8 children. Their grandparents had lived with them at one point, so there was 10 or 12 people, and it's not a big house. I mean, we have 6 people in it right now, and it's getting quite tight. So there was 10 to 12 people in that house, just the previous generation, the generation before mine. So just shows you that we're now more distant, and we'll talk about some other effects in a moment. We're living a much busier life now than we have in previous generations. And one thing is we have way too much structured adult supervised time. So kids go to school all day, then if they come home, and then if they're in extracurriculars 5 out of 7 nights a week, and this is common, I think common enough, these kids are in under adult supervision way too much. And what happens is they don't have enough time to play and just have those organic interactions outside in the yard with their friends where there isn't an adult right over their shoulder. By no means saying extracurriculars are bad. I think there's a ton of benefits to extracurriculars, but everything, it's about moderation, and too much of anything is not good, and too much structured adult supervised time. There is some research showing that can impede, and I think it's sometimes can take away from some of the organic social and emotional skills that would have happened more organically. And then back to the not enough unstructured play, which I was referring to. The third point, we've went from, so my 97-year-old grandmother, who was an educator, who is still alive, and who is a very smart, intellectually, physically, still very fit, mentally and physically. So I really enjoy having conversations with her, and she talks about what life was like in the one-room schoolhouse. And she mentions some of the similar things I talked about with the family proximity is when she had a grade 8 student and she had a kindergarten or a grade 1 student, I guess back then, the grade 8er kind of stepped up like a leader and a parent in the room and would help out the little grade 1 or 2 students. And then the grade 1 or 2 students had these older kids to looked up to, and it was a really cool dynamic. The reality is we will not be going back to one-room schoolhouses. However, we need to be cognizant that our schools are very big now, and what happens is if you think of this imaginary web underneath our schools, underneath a one-room schoolhouse, the web is pretty thick. In these big schools that we work and live in now, the webbing is stretched out. I think there's lots of awesome things happening in schools, but it's just harder that physical proximity, once again, There's bigger buildings with less adults and strong connections, and then our kids can fall through the cracks a little bit easier as well. Fourth one, our communities are less connected. We don't know our neighbors like we used to. A lot of social and emotional skills happen from mirroring, the mirror neurons, which I talked about earlier, mirroring thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of strong, caring adults. So when we're not as connected to our neighbors and our community, we're losing, we don't have as much opportunity to maybe just kind of model what's happening naturally in our own communities and so on. This next one, the breakdown of church as the heartbeat of the community. This has nothing to do with faith or religion. This has to do with, and Michael Ungar refers to this as well in some of his work, is the divorce from church. Churches were the heartbeat of the community. They were the central focal point where everybody got together for church suppers, for community activities, and so on. There's been a kind of a divorce from that. We live a much more secular life now than we have in previous generations, and that's fine. However, we got to realize the community building piece that churches played, and how if we're not filling that gap, then we're losing some of the things that were there before. Advancement in technology. I'm a big advocate of technology. I think there's a lot of phenomenal things that luxuries and conveniences we have and educational tools, but there's a phenomenon of instant gratification. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they mentioned that basically since the microwave was invented, humans have become incredibly spoiled, and we want things right now, right? And I'm guilty of this. If I need something for my business, I go on Amazon. It's at my back door, probably by the time I get up the next morning or the day after. So the idea of delayed gratification, that's actually really good for brain development for adolescents. Being bored sparks creativity, but if we're living in a world where we get instant gratification, where we get that release of dopamine, which is what everybody's chasing, that feel-good chemical, if we get that with no work, or if we get that without a lot of work and effort put in, then it can really that self-awareness, that self-management, that impulse control, some of those things can be impeded. The other piece with technology is there's an incredible imbalance between virtual and interpersonal connections. Virtual connections are the connections we have online. So I always say that you'll see people, or I hear stories even in my private practice, of people who have 500 Facebook friends. However, they feel really lonely in life, and they don't spend a lot of time face to face with people. So we're really out of whack. We have all these virtual friends, and I think we can all agree we experienced this when COVID locked us all down in the end of March and into April. Is we were still connected virtually with our loved ones, but it was not the same as being able to see them face to face. And I think we're still dealing with that with, if some people haven't seen family members from Ontario or the United States or other parts of Canada. So once again, not saying that all technology is bad or virtual connections are bad, but we need to realize that nothing will ever replace face-to-face, heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul relationships. And we need to be very cognizant of that because it directly relates to the next point, which is there's been a phenomenon of divorcing from each other, and not divorce in the relationship sense, married sense, divorcing from interpersonal relationships. About 50% of baby boomers, in an article I read, I think a year or two ago, 50% of baby boomers identified as being very lonely. 70% of millennials, my generation, so 35 to probably 25, and then about 80% of the I generation, the internet generation that's coming up right now, identified as being lonely. So there seems to be a trend that we are getting lonelier every passing generation. So the argument that we're really virtually connected, that doesn't seem to be helping. Don't know if it's making it worse, but it for sure doesn't appear to be helping, because as we become more virtually connected, we're also becoming more and more lonely, which is not healthy. Second last point is divorce from nature. We're the most disconnected from Mother Nature than we've ever been in history. And there are repercussions for this as well, developmentally, And I do think there's a lot of social and emotional skills that are learned when someone has a strong relationship with nature. And then the final point, which I don't know if you can see it on this slide, it says divorce from movement. We are the most sedentary, pardon for the bell in the background, we're the most sedentary currently than we've ever been in history as well. Movement releases dopamine. There's some social and emotional skills that are learned. I think exercise and movement and lots of different forms of movement help regulate emotions, can even help look within and be self-aware, and relationship skills and so on. So how do we fix it? So we know there is an issue. We know that there's a lot of things have changed in the last number of generations. A lot of great things, a lot of things that are maybe not so good. How do we start to fix this? The good news is there's lots of awesome stuff happening already, and we need to for sure just amplify some of those. So we're going to talk about CASEL's 5 core competencies. CASEL is the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. These guys, these ladies and gentlemen, are the leaders in the field of social and emotional learning. So if you've ever heard tell of CASEL, maybe you haven't before, and we're going to look at their website. They've set the tone. They've come up with 5 core competencies that the focus of social and emotional learning. And as you see, and I said this earlier, it's the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional. So it's 3 different things. It's not just social and emotional, it's academic, social, and emotional. Can't really have one without the other, and I argue we can't get to the point of strong academics until we have strong social and emotional foundations. So there's 5 competencies, which you can see in this wheel right here: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. We're going to go through all 5, and then I'll ask you to reflect on, in your practice, where you're already meeting these goals and where are some areas that you can maybe amplify a little bit more. So the first competency, self-awareness. If someone is very self-aware, they're able to recognize their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors, and how they are interconnected. How when I think something, when I have that self-talk, which could be, an example could be, this would be a negative example, is I'm not good enough. There's my thought. That will make me feel sad. And that feeling of sadness may make me not want to go to school. And then you can tell that this becomes a vicious cycle. Now, it can also be very positive. If you have a positive thought, it can influence and have a positive emotion, which then has a very positive behavior. So being self-aware is being aware of both positive and negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how they are interconnected. Understanding one's strengths and limitations. So what am I good at? What are some areas that I'm not so good at? Where do I need to improve upon? What do I need to amplify? And so on. And then understanding how to become confident, right? That high level of self-esteem, which is really a big protective factor. And then optimism. How to be optimistic is very important, because when life throws you a curveball, being optimistic is going to help you get through that tumultuous time. So the first one is being self-aware. The second piece, and this is kind of a build off of the first one, is once you're aware of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, do you have the ability to regulate your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? Are you able to regulate when your thoughts get a little out of control, so they don't affect your feelings so much that you're really emotionally unstable, and then they create, either you withdraw from situations or you act out in antisocial ways. So awareness, the first step; regulation, the second one; being able to manage stress, being able to stay motivated, and then setting and achieving personal and academic goals. So someone who has strong self-management would be checking off all the boxes here. The third one is social awareness. So this is being able to take the perspective of someone else, so that empathy with others, both from diverse backgrounds and maybe not even diverse backgrounds. So being able to try to look in someone else's shoes. So my son, who's 8 years old, him and his 6-year-old sister, they get in fights. That's a normal part of adolescent development and sibling development, and we do a lot of talking as parents with my oldest and my daughter and say, well, what do you think Kylie was thinking in this situation? What do you think Kellen was thinking? Trying to get them to look in someone else's shoes. And then obviously, if we can expand that to diverse backgrounds, culturally, ethnically, regionally, and so on, that's going to be that social awareness. I think is really important. I think we can agree that if you'd follow any media, um, there's some people in society that really struggle with this social awareness, and um, we're seeing it play out, which is not so good to see, unfortunately. Being able to understand social and ethical norms. What are the norms? What's considered norm in uh, um, this social context? What are the ethical norms, and so on? Recognizing family, school, and community resources. So, what are the resources out there when life does throw me a curveball, or where do I need to go to within my family? If I always say, if you can't figure out the problem, if you can't solve the problem on your own, you need to reach out to someone in your household, a caring adult, a neighbor, a coach, a teacher, whatever. We Life can get pretty hard if we try to do it on our own. Competency number 4, which is relationship skills. So the ability to establish and maintain healthy relationships. So the ability to create and keep. So how do we create? How do kids learn how to make friends? And then how do they learn how to keep friends? Because how to make friends is one piece, but then keeping them is another one. Strong communication skills. We know that most conflicts are boiled down to a lack of communication. And I think this could be right from world wars to a conflict between two students or a husband and a wife. A lot of times it comes down to lack of communication or miscommunication or misunderstanding. But if we have very strong communication skills, we can hopefully prevent or alleviate the impact. Cooperating in groups, listening actively, seeking and offering help when needed. Kind of relates to the last one I was talking about, um, is knowing when you need to get help. Say, you know what, I can't figure this out on my own. I need to go get help. But then also is when you're feeling fine, but having that empathy and that relationship skills that, hey, you know what, little Johnny over there, he needs some help. I'm going to offer some help to him. So being able to reach out for help when we need it, but also that gratitude piece and return the favor as well. Finally, competency number 5 is responsible decision making. So, making constructive and respectful choices. I think we can all agree, as parents, as educators, that's a big thing we want our young kids to do is make constructive and respectful choices. Um, Knowing how to behave appropriately in different social situations, how to behave on a rugby pitch versus in a classroom. There's some behaviors that if you tried to uh, do tackle someone in the middle of your social studies class, that's not going to work on a rugby pitch. That's perfectly okay because that's part of the game. That's a little bit of an extreme example, but knowing how to behave in different social contexts that are considered appropriate to the norms within. Being able to evaluate what are the consequences for your actions. So kind of that basically is the opposite of impulsivity, is trying to think, okay, if I do this right now, what's going to be the consequence? And then the next point is, what's the consequence for myself and the people around me, my family, my friends, my teachers, my teammates, and so on. So those are the 5 pillars. What are the benefits of social and emotional learning skills? The more our students have them, increased academic achievement. I think as educators and as parents, we can all agree that's one thing we would like our children and students to have, is be strong academically, and also strong behaviorally, being able to control emotions, being able to be self-aware. Like I said, I think of my children, I want them to be strong readers. I want them to be strong in numeracy. I want them to understand science and social studies and humanities, but I also want my kids to be able to control their emotions, um, to be aware of their emotions, to have strong relationship building skills, to be able to make good decisions, and so on. So, um, the good news is the more SEL skills our students have, the better these go up. And if you look at students in your school who are very strong academically and they're very well behaved, they're probably getting a lot of SEL skills at home. Just the issue is we have a lot of things competing for our attention nowadays where we didn't in previous generations. So we do have to be cognizant that some kids that are coming from very strong homes, they still may have some gaps in essential SEL skills. And as educators, we need to try to create an environment that we can let that happen organically and then maybe teach it and model it as well. So I'm going to show you the CASEL website real quickly here. So this website has a ton of free stuff. We just looked through it the other day. I think for anybody in ASDN, you don't really need to go any further than this website if you want to learn more about what SEL is, what it looks like in the classroom. So there's free handouts you can print off that are colorful. That wheel that I just showed you. So what it is, and we just looked on, there's free webinars. There's webinars that are coming up if you want to do a deeper dive on SEL. So some coming up in September, emotional intelligence in the workplace. Yeah, and they have some stuff up here about COVID, and there's research, obviously, SEL in action. So there's lots of stuff. There are some things that you can pay for, but I do think there's enough free resources on this website. And if we really stick to those 5 core competencies, and we do a really, really good job at highlighting those in our curriculums and in our classrooms, and we look to find new creative ways to embed them further within our classrooms and schools, I think that's going to really, really put us ahead of the game. So that's the website, just casel.org. Now what I'd like to go over really quickly is the September soft launch document that we just rolled out here in ASDN earlier this week. So this is, it's very SEL based, like Mark Donovan has been saying right from the get-go. This year, this September is relationships, and we've coined the term, or we've called it our September soft launch. So it's really focusing on relationships, making students feel seen, soothed, secured, and safe. Those 4 S's Daniel Siegel talks about, and attachment. He talks more about it from a younger developmental age, but if we think of those 4 S's and we make sure our students feel seen when they're in the buildings, that they feel safe, that they can self-soothe, or they have good relationships in the building, that they can be, and they feel secure. That's going to really, I think, let everybody settle, and then the academics can come. So the 3 R's, relationships, relationships between students and staff, students and students, students and self, students and school culture. So the different relationships there. What's the benefits? We talked about some of those. Little blurb on CASEL. And then what we did is we gave 10 different suggestions on how you can, some activities and things you can do for your September soft launch. And then we connected them to either one or more of the 5 core competencies. So as you can see here, so we call them our guideposts. Number 1 really does start with you, the teacher. You set the tone. The kids will mirror your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. If you are thinking that you're in a very dangerous place and you feel really scared and you're acting very nervous, that is going to rub off onto the kids. It's the phenomenon of mirror neurons. There's a part of our brain where we will actually start to feel what other people feel like. It's empathy, but broken down neurologically. It's like the neurology of empathy. So we need to make sure we're in a good headspace. Walk, meditate, get enough sleep, do whatever you need to. And then the core competency that relates to would be self-awareness, relationship skills, the power of using a name. We can't stress that more when you're meeting new students, especially if they're moving up to high school or moving into middle school, or if you just have a new batch of students. Getting to know their name and using their name helps them feel seen, heard, and understood. It is the beginning of relationship building. Being authentic, being understanding, care for your kids unconditionally. And then, as you can see, there's more. I'm not going to go through each one here. Mindful moments, engaging discussions, very simple stuff. A lot of teachers already are doing anyways, but there's some reminders here that let's just slow things down and have this September soft launch and really take the time to get kids settled before we start getting into academics, because some of our students are going to bounce back perfectly fine. The last 6 months was not traumatic. Might have been a bit of an inconvenience for some, but they're going to be fine. They're going to bounce back. Some of our kids have spent the last 6 months in traumatic, adverse conditions, and it's going to take them a little while to settle because usually they're only out of school for 2 months. This has been the longest March break in history. It's been a 6-month March break, and it hasn't been ideal. So we need to slow down, make sure we just get everybody feeling safe. Okay, so at this point, if we were doing an in-person session, I would get you to, in your groups or with some elbow buddies, discuss how is SEL already being implemented in your subject area. And I'll tell you right now, I did this with the subject coordinators and the leads here in ASDN. It is already being done in every single course. It's not just in health and wellness. We had the numeracy team talk about how SEL is already happening in numeracy. We had the literacy team, we had the French team, we had the cross-curricular team, we had the technology team. So it's already happening. Let's highlight some things that are happening. So if you're watching this and you want to, I think if there's something awesome happening in your class where you're like, hey, this is some SEL stuff I didn't even realize, but this English unit spends a lot of time with self-awareness and social awareness. If you want to highlight that, send it to us and so we can share, that'd be awesome. The second piece is what I want you to reflect on is what are new creative ways that you can embed more social emotional learning into your respective subject area. So first off, highlight what's already happening. Secondly, think about, hey, where's some other areas that I can maybe tie in some empathy? I think it's quite easy in literacy if you do, especially in storytelling. There's a lot of perspective taking, there's empathy, there's social awareness. What is this character feeling? What do you think they're going through? And so on. But it can be built into all courses as we found out. So just do some reflection there on where is it already happening in your classroom and where can you add a little bit more. And remember, the first step, we're coming to an end here now, the first step is we need to make sure everybody is literate and that we know what social and emotional learning is. Those 5 core competencies that I talked about: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. We need to at least understand those 5 pillars. Then focus on embedding it. But we need to get everybody speaking the same language. That's why I would say don't really venture off the CASEL website because it's a good starting point. And if we really focus on the simple things but do them really well, that's the pathway to success. And I truly believe this is a great opportunity for our district. I think we're doing some great stuff already in the area of SEL, but I do think this year we're going to take this as a silver lining. SEL is front and center from the province, from within our district, and I think that we have an opportunity to really take the lead within the province on social emotional learning, and that when COVID does end, we go back to our normal, whenever that happens, hopefully sooner rather than later, is that social emotional learning is not something that we're going to forget about. We're going to realize, hey, we've already been doing a lot of stuff already, and we've learned a whole bunch of stuff in this past year, and then it's just fully embedded into our classrooms, into the cultures within our schools and within our district. And if we do, I feel really optimistic that we have a great opportunity to do that, and then we truly would be a leader in the province in social emotional learning. Thank you very much for your time today. If you checked out a couple minutes, if you watched the whole session, feel free to reach out to me or anybody at Anglophone School District North, and obviously share any great success stories you have. That if you're doing a book study and there's an SEL skill that you think that your students are really yeah, great examples of, or if you're SEL in math or science or cross curricular or whatever, please share with us. So thanks a lot for your time, and have a great start of the 2020-21 school year.